A spell of sage exploding in the roadside.
That's a lot of people that just enter the waiting room.
Broken cage.
Okay, they're gonna come in right.
And birds are out to kiss the sky, carried by the wind. She'll build a home to keep you warm and grounded by the earth. They'll build a shelter from the storm. Take your time, little child, don't you go growing up too fast now. The world is full of magic, it's wonderful, it's fragile. Let's try to make it last. Whoa. Vibrance over violent waters at the tides, rejoicing over their new daughter. Take your time, little child, don't you go growing up too fast now. The world is full of magic, it's wonderful, it's fragile. Let's try to make it last. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh, oh. Take your time, little child, don't you go growing up too fast now. The world is full of magic, it's wonderful, it's fragile. Let's try to make it last. Let's try to make it.
Welcome everyone. We're gonna get started. I'm sure there's gonna be some more people who are going to join today. So good afternoon and welcome to Table Talk for the Asian American community. My name is Derek Hosberg and I'm the program director at Reimagine. And I'm honored to welcome you all to the table for some Death Over Dim Sum. And just thank you all for joining us today for this very special Table Talk. When we created Table Talk last fall as part of Reimagine's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative, also known as JEDI, we sought to create an honest, lively, and unscripted conversation where Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ+, and all other marginalized and underrepresented communities could share their unique perspective and truth via a wide array of subjects related to how we live and die in our respective communities. Although created for and by individuals in these communities, everyone is welcome at the table. So again, thank you for joining us. Before, I just wanted to say that we really do thank the John and Juana Harmon Foundation for their unyielding support of Reimagine and our JEDI initiative, which makes Table Talk possible. And I also just want to thank any of you who have donated to Reimagine, which has also supported this work greatly. Oops, okay, and actually that is it. I'll go to this later. And what I'm gonna do actually before we begin is I'm gonna put up a very short poll. It's just one question and it's anonymous. And basically we're gonna do a short poll at the beginning and at the end. So if you can just take, put this up for about 30 seconds. And if you can, it should pop up on your screen and you can say what you believe. Just for anybody who's having issues reading the question, it's, do you think this Table Talk series is helping to advance healing in your community and or other groups impacted by inequities and injustices? And yes, no, and maybe. So now I'm going to pass it off to your lovely, amazing and inspiring hosts, Elizabeth Wong and Holly Chan, who have really championed and organized this entire Table Talk series for the Asian American community. And yeah, and I'm just excited to pass it off to them to take you away for this event.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat since we're unfortunately not all able to share the same table right now. And since most of us are calling in from around the United States, please join us in acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of multitudes of Indigenous peoples, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This land acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of colonialism. So as a resident of Seattle, I'm located on Coast Salish, Duwamish, Still-Guamish, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish land. If you're curious about the Indigenous territory where you're located, we'll go ahead and post a link where you can search your zip code and it'll show you what lands you're on. We also want to take a moment to remember those who have been murdered out of ignorance and hatred, including most recently Pak Ho, Angelo Quinto, Vichar Ratanapakdi, Christian Hall, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, and at this point, really just far, far too many others. So Liz is going to kick it off for us.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I like to start with just sort of creating the intention for today's event. Our goal is to hold space for those who identify as Asian American. And when we say hold space, we found this quote from end-of-life doula Francesca Lynn Arnoldi to be useful to describe what we mean. We find abundant spaciousness within this space we hold. There's room for it all: joy and sorrow, laughter and tears, wonderment and worry. We invite any of it in and let it be present, watching shifts and changes emerge. Things don't need to be a certain way. Humans are complicated beings capable of a complicated array of emotion. Just like how there is no one right way to live life or grieve, there is no one right way to be an Asian American. Let's all recognize that the experiences within the Asian American community can greatly vary depending on region, color of skin, religion, immigration status, and so forth. Let us use our short time together to listen to one another's perspective such that we can help guide ourselves, families, and our larger communities. So with that, let's get talking. As you know, this table talk is, we've themed it Death Over Dim Sum. And to provide some context, Death Over Dim Sum was created by Holly and I back in 2019 to be a bilingual discussion over food, to encourage people to be curious and open to issues around death and dying. The idea was to have attendees choose topics they are interested in via a menu of offerings, seat them at the same table with an industry expert, and hold space for whatever discussions arise, meeting people where they are. But given COVID and this event being virtual, today's table talk is an iteration of our Death Over Dim Sum concept, where we will get to hear from our featured industry experts and featured guests, tell their personal and professional stories about being of service to the AAPI community. While we cannot offer dim sum, we do invite you to have lunch with us. As you can see, Holly is also making dumplings in the background. And with that, I would like to introduce our guests at the table today. We have Dr. Michelle Ong, Center Lead Physician at Unlock Pace Powell Center in San Francisco, Chinatown. We have Annie Chung, President and CEO of Self-Help for the Elderly. We have Emily Ho, Senior Financial Consultant and phlebotomist who works in the heart of Chinatown at Chinese Hospital, and who's currently working as we speak, but taking a break to join us today for lunch. Olga O'Hara, who's funeral counselor at McAvoy O'Hara Company, California's premier funeral firm. And with that, we would like to just turn it over to our guests and have them take a minute to tell us what brought them to today's table. And I would first invite Annie to the table.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth and Holly and Dara for including me in your discussion. Elizabeth is a member of our Chinese subcommittee. We're doing years work of palliative care and particularly focus on end of life and advanced care directive. So when Elizabeth began her table talk series, I attended the first one, and she asked me to share some of my personal as well as kind of a professional experience in this topic. So thank you again, Holly, for inviting. So what brought me here is I reflected on my own mother. She passed away at age 102 about 5 years ago. And she's a very, really open-minded mother for a Chinese elderly her age. And I have to say that it's really amazing that kind of looking at my mother, how she planned, for the end of life, didn't come in one sitting or one conversation. First, there are 10 of us, that's 7 boys and 3 girls in the family. And except for 2 brothers in Hong Kong, most of us are actually in the Bay Area at the time. And she was, I think she was about 90 years old when she told my older sister that it's time to get her dress ready. And that's it. It's a simple kind of a request. And we said, Mom, we get you dresses and sweaters and tops and pants all the time. But she wouldn't elaborate. And she just looked at my older sister and said, she'll know what it means, right? So just sharing with you that it means that she's asking Dorothy, my older sister, to get the dress ready for her when she passed away, like when we dressed her and put her in the casket, and she needed a new dress, and then so nobody said anything, and my sister got her something, right? She put it away, and just the conversation never came up again. But in spurts, I think that my mother was able to let all of us know, sometimes collectively in family settings, but sometimes individually to each one of us when she feels like talking about it, of really what she valued and what she expects, and that if it's time for her to go, just let it be and don't be sad. So I remember that kind of stayed in our mind. She was only hospital for about 8 days. And then within a year, she passed away. In her life of the 100 plus years, she almost never stayed in a hospital. All 10 of us were born, 9 of us were born with midwives, and only my younger sister was born in a hospital, very briefly. So the 8 days was very traumatic experience. And I remember for Chinese speaking elderly, the subject of death and dying really is a difficult one. And although she feels sometimes comfortable to say it or share it, but most of the time it's a very short kind of a comment. So we have to remember that, and not, if the time is not right, we cannot go in and keep asking, just like the dress. When we make the comment that, oh, we get you clothes all the time, Mom, but if she doesn't elaborate, then just let it drop. But meaning that in her own way, and with my older sister, they would know, kind of, right? So cultural is such that it's sometimes very subtle, but I would say this, that there's always a time to kind of have a breakthrough, and then to create a situation or an environment that you could engage with your older parents. So just be persistent and find the right time. So that's why I want to come and share, not just personally, because my mom did live a very long and wonderful life, but more with my professional work at Self for the Elderly, that we really wanted to help as many seniors to find those moments that they could reach out to somebody and get their values and their life planning done. Yeah. So that's how I got here, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Annie, thank you so much for sharing that bit of personal story that has me really feel connected to you. I understand what you mean when you say when our parents share in these really short snippets, you almost have to just capture it. Because they don't want to, if you ask them more questions, they usually don't want to talk about it, which is really ironic. They only want to tell you when they're ready. But I do get that sometimes as adult children, really to allow ourselves to really hear when they're telling us something and to really capture it. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Michelle, would you like to share?
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for inviting me and everybody. I got invited or introduced to Elizabeth by Dr. Ben Louis, who I greatly respect. He's one of our chiefs at Unlock. And I saw the snippet of the first recording, and it just really interested me how personal stories everybody talked about. So I'm really happy to be part of this. And what got me, I'm with Unlock, which is a PACE program that's all encompasses healthcare, social work care. We really deal with end of life a lot. And what led me here, I'm coming from an angle that's really a daughter and a caregiver and a physician, and I've kind of experienced every aspect of that. And I'm actually American born Chinese, and I'm living in the very house that my father came when he was 5 years old and through Angel Island, and I'm living in the very house that he purchased in the 1950s that my grandparents lived in. So, and they were part of the very poor community when they came over in the Great Depression, and companies like Annie's company, the self-help for elderly, those things really helped them survive. And my father never asked me to be a doctor. He thought as a female, being in Chinese community, Chinese daughter, I was supposed to go into like bookkeeping or something like that. But I'm competitive and I have a brother. So that's why one of the reasons I became a doctor, not just to help people, but to be my brother who wanted to be a dentist. But anyway, my father got severe dementia. He had Parkinson's and he got severe dementia, and he also had prostate cancer, but his death came kind of unexpectedly. The dementia was in the way, so we never could talk about anything with him. And because he wouldn't understand or did not want to talk about it. It's so taboo. And like I said, I had grown up in Sacramento, but with visiting my grandparents in San Francisco all the time. And my grandparents were elderly, most of them, when they died. And my parents and their siblings kept them at home and cared for them. And so even now is a struggle. As my mom's still alive, she's 88. I have her in assisted living, and it's a struggle because the Chinese community, oh no, you're supposed to take care of your elderly, your family. You're supposed to take, so that's a struggle from that angle. Back to my father with the severe dementia, and he had prostate cancer. 5 years later, he basically was bleeding to death from the radiation therapy that damaged his bladder. And literally in those 5 days, because I'm the youngest child, but because you're the healthcare provider, you're asked all the questions. And I had to make those decisions to withdraw care, convince him to get blood transfusions, things like that. And it was so hard. And I'm glad Olga, who will speak later, she's with one of the funeral homes. I'm so glad you're here and available to talk, because I went through the process where my father literally died in like 5 days after 10 blood transfusions. He died, and I had 4 hours because the hospital keeps you. And I had to call, I'm literally Googling, thank God for Google, but I'm Googling, not nursing homes, funeral homes. We had to buy a plot, visit the funeral home, make the services, everything literally in a couple hours. And that's why I'm so grateful for Unlock. It's such a great organization, because we talk with everybody who enrolls with us. We talk about advanced care, And if somebody's not ready for it, and we're working, or they have dementia, we're working with the families and ongoing reviewing, what we want to decide. So, I mean, healthcare decision making is so important, because you really want to represent your loved one. If you have to be that one deciding, or even when they have some capacity, you want to help them understand at their level. So I've kind of been through it all, and now I'm the caregiver. My mom's in an assisted living, but immediately after my father's death, we're like, okay, these funeral plans, we've got yours, Mom, and no, the DPOA, everything's all set up. But without it, I mean, I'm so grateful for these conversations, and that's so I ended up. My father's dementia hit right before I joined Unlock. I mean, death hit before I joined Unlock, and I'm so grateful because I'm internal medicine trained, not really geriatric trained, but seeing the difference between like my Kaiser experiences and all that, we don't have those conversations with families or patients that we have at Unlock. And I'm so grateful that I fell into this role and more geriatric trained, because it's such a privilege, an honor. You get to know, what a person loves and fears most about life, and that's when you know that that actually helps break the barrier to talk about these conversations. Yeah, so that's kind of what led me here.
Thank you, Michelle, so much for sharing that. On some levels, again, I can also relate. I mean, being a nurse myself and being the caregiver and the daughter in my situation. And in terms of what you're saying is what I'm hearing between you, Annie, and you, is that oftentimes you're left with only limited days to execute on these huge decisions. And in most cases, I think as the adult child, not feeling supported, because the ultimate thing that we want to do is honor our parents. And without talking to them, or we don't know exactly what we're even doing in the best intention is really hitting the mark. And like I said, these conversations are important. And thank you for being here and sharing yourself as well, so that we can all have a better understanding how important these conversations need to get started earlier, upstream from when a crisis happens. Thank you. I guess with that, we'll go to Olga. Olga, please introduce yourself and share your story.
Hi, so I'm Olga O'Hara, and I was drawn to this business, I would say, or the business of helping people at the time of their passing, and even before so, but just with their final arrangements for them, either themselves or someone that they love, because my family. So I'm fourth generation of doing this work. And it kind of struck me while Michelle was just talking that my great grandfather, who started this, probably could never conceive that this many years later, I'd be able to be still doing this and then reaching so many people with talking about this and making them hopefully feel more and more comfortable. Because just like the other ladies were saying, it's just so wonderful to have people come together and feel supported, know they're not alone, and know that we all kind of go through similar struggles. But in the AAPI community, it's just so much more prevalent with the taboo situation of talking about death. And so it does make it difficult. And in my capacity, helping people, people who are able to have that communication prior are able to carry it over, usually through the time, and just kind of continue that. And like Michelle was saying, when things are happening, the level of emotion and the mindset that we're in is totally different. And we're having to emotionally go through something that's quite possibly one of the hardest things, or hardest thing we'll ever really have to, transition and get through. So being able to have those little conversations and recognizing those moments. And I try to say, follow your gut feeling, because if we're in those moments and having conversations, or even if we're watching television, if something can spark where you feel that there may be an opening because you've been thinking about trying to have this conversation, go with your gut feeling and maybe just try it. because these are people that we love. We're having these conversations because we love people and we're close to people enough to do this. And what could really go wrong? I mean, I know it makes us feel comfortable, but fear shuts down really important communication, I think, sometimes. And a lot of time I think people come into my place and I can see in them where they wish that they had maybe just taken one of those opportunities because they were there maybe. And now we're past that point by the time people come to me. So I'm just so happy to engage with everyone.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you for being here and to just be able to be available when questions come into the chat about funeral planning. I think what I wanted to echo what you said is that, part of how I got into this work, being a registered nurse and then subsequently training as an end-of-life doula, was really to see how I could facilitate these conversations with my mom. And like you said, oftentimes it may take losing a loved member that gets someone else in the family to start these conversations. And in that space, it did spark that for my mom after my dad died. But it was then taking those opportunities, like you said, when you see an opening, to just be brave and just ask the question. They may not want to answer, and that's okay. And that's when we just step away and we just revisit. Especially in the Chinese community, we just do have to understand and respect that there are taboos, superstition, but it doesn't mean that we don't keep trying, like you said. So thank you for bringing that up. Emily. Is Emily here? Oh, she stepped away for a minute. I think she'll be back. So Emily, she, she'll come and share more about her role as a financial planner. I just find that sometimes when we talk about death, some of the easiest approaches that I've heard from friends is that they're much more willing to deal with their financial planning than they are with their medical and advanced planning. And I don't know if Annie or Michelle can speak to this until Emily can return. Like I said, Emily is working right now, so we're very appreciative and grateful she's making this time, but I think she had to step away for 2 minutes. But if Annie or Michelle, oh, here's Emily.
I literally just texted you and I said, give me 2 minutes because one of the patients, the doctor's last appointment just left.
Thank you. We'll give you a breath.
Okay. Hi, guys. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. At least you're in my ear so I can hear you guys. And thank you, Holly and Dara. I know you guys put so much work and effort into organizing this talk today. I met Elizabeth over a dinner party a while back, and her mom was sitting right next to me, and she's just such a lovely lady. And from that moment, it was just an instant connection. I had this new friend, and we just talked and talked, and I loved Elizabeth's personality. And when she and Holly first started the Death Over Dim Sum, I think I attended the first meeting as when everyone out here as a participant, and coming back as a speaker, it's very different. But what brought me here today to talk, my parents also came from a very poor community. My father, his brother, my uncle, and parents died in the war, World War II. Right after the war, he watched his brother get executed by the government. And my aunt and my dad fled after the government took their land. They fled to Hong Kong. And coming here, trying to get those snippets out of him to hear about his hardship, his upbringing, it's difficult. And kind of what Annie was saying, sometimes little events. I once had a pet rooster, and just the crowing of that rooster would trigger memories he had as a kid. And for 2 minutes, he would just talk about his childhood. And after those 2 minutes, it was almost like he forgot what he said, that trauma, that PTSD, he just wouldn't elaborate anymore. So being able to hear that, those are stories that I would definitely pass down to my nieces, my nephews, my grandkids. My mom, she and my dad had me at a very old age. My dad was 55 when they had me. I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and they were tailors. So my oldest brother's a doctor. I'm in the medical field. And when my oldest brother, same thing as Michelle, was like, I'm going to get a doctor, my parents were like, no, no, no. We know nothing about medical. Don't do it. You're going to work long hours. And my brother was just like, but I want to help people. And when I went into medical, it was a little easier because I was like, you let your oldest son go into medical. I should be able to. But what brought me into a financial advisor and training in long-term care and trying to make people's just their full like personal strategies was seeing what my parents created. They fully achieved the American dream. They went from $20 in their pocket coming over here, bringing my mom's 6 siblings, my grandma, my dad brought his sister here to basically well over high 7-figure portfolio. And that being said, my siblings had nothing growing up. So being the youngest, I got really lucky. And I got to see the value of what a dollar could mean. But when I saw my friends who their parents were also very well off, some of them lost their parents really young and they became trust fund children. And unfortunately, today, when I reach out to them, they have nothing because their parents didn't teach them. And when they're in, well, I'm almost 30. And when I reach out to them and I talk to them about, hey, you need to set up all these long-term care. Hey, I know some of their parents are reaching 65. Do you guys know about Medicare? Do you need help with all these solutions? Some of them are retiring. Some of these parents, I just spoke with one actually, all she cared about was getting her daughter to college. Single mother, the father never spent a day in his life with the child, and all this mother cared about was, I want my daughter to go through college and my job is done. But I spoke with her last week and she's reaching 66, 68, somewhere in the middle there, and she has nothing. She has no retirement. She has no savings. She's still working. She has no idea when to retire or if she can even retire. And she's the oldest of 7. And when I asked her if her siblings are set up anywhere else, it was heartbreaking to hear that none of them had anything set up. When you're in this field and when you're in the medical field, you see a lot of this. And so that's one of the huge reasons that brought me here was for people that are on this talk, this is something that you now can see all these resources and all these people that are just here to help or just to educate and give advice on which step to take. I think even though this last year of COVID has been a horrible year for most, it's now opened a lot of doors and opportunities for people across state borders from all over the country to be able to help one another. And we've all gone through the same experiences. And that's just kind of what brought me here. I know that I've had a chance to hear Annie and Michelle and Olga talk and Elizabeth, and I'm excited to hear from Holly and Dara later. But it's inspirational. It's inspirational to know that when it's never too early to think about it, and it's never too late to kind of make sure that your future generation or everyone around us is taken care of.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Emily. I know when I met Emily, I was just so blown away by her, given that she was in her 20s and accomplished way more than I did when I was in my 20s, and just her compassionate heart and caring soul. And I think what she touched upon is, so for so many of us, we know this, we hear stories, we've experienced it, hearing, even if we didn't hear the exact details, we know our parents went through sacrifices, being immigrants, coming, like my mom told me she came to this country with $250 in her pocket. And, you know, and so many of our parents, you know, they sacrifice, they work hard because they want their children to go to college and to be successful. That often they don't put themselves first. And I think with, especially, you know, and for us adult children, I keep saying us adult children, but, you know, our generation, part of it is really not paying it, you know, paying it forward, but really paying it backwards for our parents to be able to have peace, that whatever sacrifices they've endured, that at least in their later years, they don't have to worry, or they don't have to be consumed by, you know, the concerns. But we know that those are traumas from the past that sometimes it's not so easy to shake off, even if we tell them, don't worry. But like you said, we struggle with how do we provide caregiving, and not that we don't want to, but when their clinical situation presents, like Michelle, with dementia, they require more help, that if they don't have funds set aside that can cover those costs, it puts us in a predicament where we do want to, you know, we want to show love to our parents because they want us to have them at home and provide care. However, how do those conversations come about so that we can hear every person and make those arrangements ahead of time should they present? So this is the complicated situations that's before all of us, you know, regardless of Asian American, just in terms of being, you know, people in the community. But being Asian, there's even more nuances around that. So part of it is, what have been your experience either working with clients or being observed, you know, being the observer of dynamics, you know, that you've seen either very positive in the way that they've connected with each other within the family, or what you saw as, you know, opportunities for more education, or so I'm just going to leave that open to whoever wants to take that, and we can go round robin. But Michelle, I see that you're unmuted.
I just wanted to say, when I think a lot of times we have to understand, where are we coming from? Like, what was our exposure to death? And all those experiences help during those conversations. And I still have those conversations. Had a conversation yesterday morning with one of our participants. And it's all the experiences, and then it's an art that you have to learn to talk. But there's never a mistake. You just have to open up that conversation. So when I was thinking about death, one grandmother, my paternal grandmother, died before I was born. And the rest of my grandparents were passed away after their 80s, or my grandmother was 96. And, you know, I watched again my aunts and uncles take care of my grandparents. But my first death, where I was kind of old enough to sort of understand, maybe I was about 8 years old, it was my grandfather from lung cancer. And it's just such a taboo, because you're not supposed to talk about death. I mean, we were celebrating his 80th birthday, and he was cachectic, and they were carrying him to do one of those big 80th birthday parties to celebrate. And when he passed and there was the funeral, I didn't understand anything about it. And there were these Chinese ladies dressed in really black, and they're crying loudly. I'm not experienced with that, but I guess there are something where you can hire these mourners, and it scared me. And I was asking my mom, well, who are they? And she's like, shh, shh, you know, you're not supposed to talk or anything like that. So that was my first experience. And then I was just thinking, with the climate, with all this Asian Pacific Islander hate that's showing up in the news a lot, after we went to the funeral, and subsequently you go visit the cemetery, and there were these non-Asian kids, I'm just a kid too, and they were making sounds like, ching chong, Charlie Chan, this, that, and they were saying, why don't you get your own cemetery? I mean, so that was my kind of like first experience with that and everything. And just knowing that, and just seeing the different cultures. And the other cemetery of my other grandparents was a Chinese cemetery, and we'd always do the spiritual things to respect the ancestors. And even that, you don't understand, and everything's so taboo. You can't even ask, because how Annie was saying that mom wanted a new dress and everything. I didn't understand, why are we buying new clothes, an extra pair of clothes to put in the thing, and the shoes, and you have to place the shoes in the, and I worry about that now, because my mother's 88, and her years are coming, and I don't know those rituals. I'm the youngest, and her siblings, she was one of the younger ones, so they're all gone, and I don't know. You have to put a blanket on the casket, and you can't flip it this way. You have to lay it this way, and I'm scared because I don't know those things. And with COVID, she's been in the assisted living, and I only just literally last week got to actually touch her again. So it's make those connections while you can, whether they have dementia or not. If you make the connections, and she's told me after my father's death, it's been 9 years, but I was able to talk to her and ask her what she wants and know her. And I'm glad we've had those conversations, because now she's kind of, doesn't know how to say what she wants as well. Except I want to go home, and then you're torn, because what's the best care that I'm capable, my family's capable of giving. So it's just how you see death, and all these experiences every day as a caregiver, as a daughter, as a doctor, build into every single discussion, and they're all individualized. And with our patients, and again, I love Unlock, because they're so good at knowing the person as a whole and the families, and it's so important to just talk about this all the time, and respect that it is a taboo. Nobody wants to talk about death, especially Asians who are so superstitious. I mean, God forbid you say death on a birthday. Mom will be really mad at you. And but it's so important. And even yesterday, when I spoke to this gentleman, I've probably known him for about, I've been with Unlock for 8 or 9 years, and I've known him for 5 years, and he's not really wanting to talk about it. And he'll get into depression if he does talk about it, but just kind of approaching it little stages. We had a nice conversation yesterday, and I know what he wants, and that's very important to respect. And when they don't get a chance to say what you want, or if you don't have these conversations, then one of the most painful experiences I had with one of my Unlock participants is that, the Asian families, the daughter often is the one taking care of the mother at the end, and knows them the best, knows what they would want. But it comes towards the end of life, and then big brother, who's the first son, is all the way in Australia, and comes in, and it's like, I want everything, and it was the most painful, because there was this beautiful lady who was at the end of her, her literally days left, and the brother demanded that, we want everything done. And I was like, I see your sister who knows your mother and wants to respect her wishes to be comfortable. I see her there every day visiting your mom, and I have never met you. And it was sad, because she ended up hospitalized and had to be intubated, and passed with a tube. It was like, she could have been kept comfortable. And that's the hard part about being the physician, is you have to honor the family's wishes and stuff, despite what I may personally feel. But that was a a chance. I felt if the conversations were started earlier with the family or something, it may have been a different outcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
I know exactly what you're saying. My husband is an ICU doctor. And like I said, I'm a nurse. And knowing this, like I said, knowing what can be the possibility really motivated me to try to start these conversations early. And like I said, whether or not you're in healthcare or not, it doesn't prepare you on how to have these conversations. And like I said, my mom is predominantly Cantonese speaking. So thankfully, able to speak, and I was trying to manage it. But it was, so some ways that I approach and it is an art, you know, you have to just throw it out there, try it, see if it works, and you have to dial it back. With my mom, I took upon an opportunity because she asked me a question, being the nurse, because her friend was posed with an advanced, asked about their code status, and you know, and my mom's friend says, ask your daughter, she's a nurse, like, what does this mean? And she comes back to me and she goes, yeah, why are they asking her to sign, you know, her code status? Like, what's her wishes? Is it a DNR? I say, and before I even had a chance to speak, I already can see the misinformation, the lack of understanding around advanced directives. Because my mom says, these doctors and nurses are so quick to ask them to sign away. They don't even want to help them, you know? And because I'm the nurse, I was able to say, no, Mom, that's why they're asking you now. They don't want to ask you when you're, you know, when you need it. They need to understand. And that was my small opening to her. And that was when I started to say, hey, maybe you should have one too. And boy, the reaction that I got was like, no. And I knew to back off of that. And then a little bit later, I did say, Mom, you know, it is important that we have this conversation. And of course, thank God for Google. I'm like, there has to be something that's in Chinese around advanced directive. And I was able to find a YouTube video of a physician presenting 2 case studies in the Asian community in Cantonese about the importance of an advanced directive. And how I decided to approach my mom was, Mom, you want to watch this? But rather than just putting it up on the screen and having her watch it, I actually sat next to her and I watched it with her to first make sure that what the content is accurate or what is being said, and to make sure she can ask questions. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but at the end, because at the end of the program, it takes you to a link where you can print up the advanced care, the prepare to care form in Chinese. And she actually then said, well, why don't you print up a copy? And I was like, oh, you know, like she was willing to at least look at it. Of course, I knew that was just going to be the first step to like whether or not she's going to read it. So I guess part of like what you're saying is we have to just try, but we also want to do it in partnership. I think often we forget that there's just they're so scared. They don't even want to talk about this. But then how do we facilitate that is to accompanying them, whether it's to help them learn and really be taking more of an active role in doing some of that. I think partly because with my mom, same thing, I would have thought she wanted a traditional funeral. But since we started to have these conversations around the advanced planning, just to backtrack, I have a sister whose relationship is a little bit more distant. And because I'm the nurse, I'm the older one, my mom says, you'll know what I want at the time. But because of what you mentioned about conflict between siblings, I even brought that up with my mom. I said, Mom, I know what, but I don't think my sister knows. I think it's and I actually spelled it out for them because I really don't think they get the concept. I spelled it out for my mom where I finally said, I know when you're not here, you don't want any disagreement between my sister and I. That's the last thing you want, which is why even though I know your wishes, I think it's important that she hears it straight from you. And then something clicked for my mom and she goes, okay, get your sister on the phone. And in that opportunity, my mom did express to my sister, like, unless it's going to contribute to my quality of care, don't do everything, you know? And so we started those conversations again. And I'm just sharing that just because there's opportunities and again, recognizing it, but rather than just having it be our parents doing it, how can we facilitate those conversations? So I see Annie's unmuted. Annie, did you want to share?
Yeah, I kind of want to say this. I really feel, you know, like what Michelle said and what you said, Elizabeth. Sometimes the parent, the seniors that we serve are like expecting, right, that the children will take care of all the decisions. And in their mind is if my children make the decision, it is for my best interest. But they never kind of said it out loud, but just keep deferring and deferring. So we're finding sometimes the situation is if there are conflicts among the siblings on the care, right, or on the funeral arrangement and everything, it creates, it breaks up the family. And I don't think that would be the last thing that the senior wanted, right? Exactly what you said, Elizabeth. So we're just, like thinking that it's really important, because if we are the trusted party, that our senior trusts us enough to come to us and ask for assistance, that is really important to really bring the family and the senior together, like find an opportunity. Because recently, the last 3 months, our seniors are beginning to open up. Because why? Because COVID scared them. They knew now that if they're hospitalized, there will be no chance, right, for them to talk to their children, or the children can visit. So we have a senior that actually called up a few months ago and said, I'm so worried that I lost sleep, I have nightmares, but I heard you talk about, I heard Self-Help talk about helping us to plan for these things. And I really want my family to know what I want. So can you help me, right? So we reached out, and they came in with the family. Yuling, my social worker, did a session, used a heart-to-heart kind of a game that eased them into the discussion and conversation. And it took probably 6 weeks to 2 months to let the entire family agree on the care, and then filled out the advance directive form. And now the senior called back and say she felt so good, so relieved that she could sleep now. Before, she couldn't even sleep. So I think that during this pandemic, there might be an opportunity for children, for adult children, to little bit, carry the conversation, push it a little bit, and say that, Mom, Dad, I just wanted to know, let's sit down and talk about it. So I think that the timing is on our side to not be, it's kind of like a dance, right? Your parents are waiting for you to take the initiative. And then you as the adult child say, hey, if my parents are not comfortable to talk about it, I'm not gonna push it. So it's but somebody have to make the initiative. And usually the person that makes it happen is the doctor, because now they give this form to you, and then the parents will say, here, my doctor just gave me this big, huge 20-page form, so you go fill it out, right? But if the elderly keep deferring all the decision on the form to the one that signed the proxy, it's not a real useful conversation either, right? They just fill out the form because they just satisfy their PCP's wishes. So I think that now that we're all kind of still a little bit sheltered in place, right? We're starting to see our loved ones. So I hope that you could work with the community partners, like Onlot, like Self-Help, like Chinese Hospital, and we could do the follow-up. But once you get both the children and the seniors on the same page, then I think it flows a lot easier. Don't be too worried, because knowing that whatever decision, if you are the older sibling, or whatever decision you make, your parent or your parents will be okay with it, even if they don't say it out loud. So that there should be no regrets, right? Because we hear a lot of regrets. We run the hospice services, and then sometimes one child wants to do something, the other sibling didn't want to, and then afterwards they will both come back and say, I regret what I did. Both scenarios. So we're now letting our seniors know that if you really want to just defer the decision, also let your children know that whatever decision they finally made, you have no regret, so that there's a less of a guilt feeling that you did something wrong, because you could carry that guilt for the rest of your life, and that's not healthy and not good. So I believe that be open, really be open and be honest if you don't feel comfortable, don't push it, but find the opportunity. And in our experience, the COVID and the pandemic is bringing that urgency to our seniors, and they're reaching out, maybe non-verbally, but they are reaching out to find some resolution. So go for it before that window closes up again.
And thank you, Annie, for saying that. I think also it's just understanding the nuances within the aging. So also the way that I pivoted the conversation with my mom is understanding that they don't want to be a burden on us.
Yeah.
And so the way I pivoted the conversation with my mom is, I know you don't want to be a burden. And I want you to know that not knowing what your wishes are would help me not have it feel like a burden. I think slowly having them start to get that being a burden by not talking up, it's a burden when you don't talk about it. And I said, my wish here between my sister and I is just to honor your wishes and what you want. We're not trying to tell you what you should do or how you should do it. But if you don't tell us, then how are we supposed to know? I mean, I guess, and kind of going back to the funeral planning, I would have assumed hands down, my mom would have wanted a traditional funeral like all of my other relatives. But one of her friends, really close friends, died and was cremated. And out of her visiting her friend at the columbarium, which first of all, I grew up in San Francisco, didn't even know it existed. It was like tucked away. And she went to visit her friend and it was a whole new world to her. She was like, what are these niches? What are these things? And out of our discussion, I said, oh, you know, you get to choose your urn. You could put pictures that could tell your own life story versus like if you do a traditional burial, it's just a headstone. And my mom started to think, because she was like, well, as much I would love for you guys to pay respect in the traditional way and going to the cemetery, she also realizes that because my nieces are more westernized, they may not adopt those traditions like she's instilled in us. And she's like, oh, and she has a story that she wants to tell. And so when she saw her friend who loved playing MJ, had a few MJ tiles in her niche, she was like, oh. And that sparked some conversations further that she took. I just drove her to visit the friend, and who knew that in that action, these conversations would open up. And she then said, now I know what photo she wants to put in the niche. I know what outfit she wants in there. And since we've had these conversations over the course of many years, just so you know, this is not a fast process. This is not an overnight conversation. I've been at this with my mom for the past 6 years, that only now, because she is 82 going on 90, I say, but this time that we have less, especially with COVID, not being able to see each other and the mental health about being isolated, it's all about how does she enjoy this time. We take her to meals, we have her visit her grandchildren, and we got now that because those discussions are already done, we can use the energy to move on to something else. And so that's what's important. Now, there's still a lot of things she's not willing to talk about, which takes me to Emily, which is long-term care. Because I said, Mom, I know you don't want to go to the hospital. You want us to take care of you. However, again, if you start to require a higher level of need, we might have to take a caregiver, you know, and that's a whole other story, whether or not they receive help. But with Emily, like you said, I often think that people are more comfortable planning their financial future. Like I think parents usually would say, I want to do a trust, the house is going to go to so-and-so. But I don't know that they're thinking about long-term care in terms of care, like caregivers down the road. So maybe you can speak to that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I mean, when I talk to my clients, it's completely different than how I talk to my own family, just because the emotional level is different. You still have to be respectful. You still have to be understanding of where you're going from, but it's kind of easier to hear from a stranger than from your own family, which is very different. I know that I have a WeChat with all 7 siblings, and especially this last year, we've had many arguments with each other of what mom and dad wants. We need this advance directive. And my sister, they all came up to me and they said, you're the youngest. Mom and dad will listen to you the most. So they gave me this 20-page packet and said, you talk to them. And the way that I approached it to my parents was I said, I did it 2 weeks before. And I said, Mom, Dad, I have some questions I need to ask you. We're going to do this in 2 weeks. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be right now. And of course, the first thing that you just have to brace for is them saying no, because they're going to feel attacked and they're going to get defensive. It is not something that's easy to talk about, especially when your parents are in their 70s, 80s, and they don't want to think about it because they've already seen so many friends go. And a lot of times, especially with the news, or they see how they're, even when my uncle passed, there was fighting between my cousins. Um, there was fighting between the siblings. There was fighting between the kids. As soon as my uncle signed everything over to my cousins, they threw him into a nursing home and told the nursing staff no one's able to talk to him. My mom could not call my uncle. They couldn't even say goodbye to him. But they literally threw him into someplace in Seattle. And for a month, we couldn't do anything. We had to get social services and everything. It was horrible. But it's these horror stories that also make elderly scared to do anything. And so when I talked to my parents, I said, these are very broad questions. I don't need you to make a full decision, but I need you to think about it. The topic is a trust, it's an advance directive, it's a will. It's redoing your will and your trust, because you guys did your trust in 1991 and it's been 30 years. I'm no longer under the age of 25, and I really don't want your assets to go to a guardian who doesn't know us, who hasn't seen us in years. And so when I brought it up to them, every couple days, I'd go back up and I said, Mom, Dad, I know you don't want to meet in 2 weeks, but what time works best for you in 2 weeks? How about before dinner? And, once again, it's a very quick conversation. And if you don't want to talk about it in 2 weeks, we can just have a nice chat about anything. And about a week before, same thing. It's about never giving up, even though they don't want to do it, because it's something that's super important, it's super urgent. And when, similar to what, Michelle is saying, is my brother, he's a doctor, he's in Virginia. And he brought up to us, we should look into nursing facilities for mom and dad. It was just out of the blue. And I said, why would you think that? And I got very upset. I got very angry because he hasn't been home in 5 years. He has no idea what mom and dad's health is like. He just knows that dad's 83 this year, and that's around the age that we should put him in a nursing facility. And being the youngest, I'm often looked as the baby of the family. I'm often looked as, oh, baby sister doesn't know anything, because there's a 20-year gap. So after my other siblings were talking to my brother about how mom and dad never wish to be in a nursing facility, they want private care. My brother goes, well, that's very expensive. How are we going to pay for it? The long-term care aspect. I finally took the courage and I said, your father walks 20,000 steps a day. He literally spends half his day walking. He wakes up, walks a mile, eats breakfast, walks another mile, reads a newspaper, and vice versa. And I said, your mom still drives. Your father just renewed his driver's license. And he's happy. They're happy at what they're doing with their lives. And I said, as for the long-term care and financial aspect, we've already talked to mom and dad about this. We've already set aside the funds for this. We bought their plots when we had to bring our grandparents. The Chinese government about 20 years ago contacted us and said, if we want our grandparents' remains, we have to go back to China, resurrect them from the ground, transport their bones here, and rebury them. And it was at that point, kind of what Elizabeth said, that opening where my sister at the time said, well, mom and dad, do you want to buy a plot next to grandma, grandpa? That way it's cheaper now. You know, they like to save money. It's cheaper now. And we don't have to. And if you don't want, it's just an investment. We can sell the plot later. And they were like, oh, okay, it's an investment. And that's literally what they heard. They didn't hear anything about them being buried there, anything. They knew that, okay, at some point. And that was a long time ago. When it comes to my clients, we have a lot of plans now that it's not a use it or lose it. And that's what I've heard so much, especially when I first joined the financial advising setting, was people would buy these long-term care plans or these, and when they tried to collect the money, it was a nightmare where they put all this money in there and they never need long-term care, so they just lost the money. Or they need long-term care and there are all these fine red line prints. And I'm a full broker. And one of the reasons why I chose to be a broker was just because I wanted to represent my client. I wanted to make sure that what I would sell to other people is what I would sell personally to myself, to my family, to my siblings, because at the end of the day, everyone's human. And you've all worked so hard in your life to make sure that everything is taken care of and your family and your loved ones are okay. And the hardest part for me to see, especially when I work in the Chinese hospital, is I see these elderly geriatric patients who have worked 40, 50 years of their life to create this legacy that they want to leave for their kids. And it's wasted on medical bills. It's completely just shattered because they never thought that a hospital stay or surgery or constant round the clock nursing staff would cost so much. And when it comes to your loved ones, like what Elizabeth was saying, the burden of, well, how do I find this? There's no cost too great for my parents. There's no cost too great for a loved one. They'll pay anything. And it ends up at the end, once they're no longer with us, now that suffering starts because now they're at a different point where they have to continue from their life. And that's the hardest part for when I see that.
Well, thank you, Emily, for sharing so in depth all that. I think our audience is probably able to relate to a lot of that too, in terms of the challenges and ongoing how to have these conversations. And as each of our speakers have shared, there's just so many facets to this conversation. It's not even the one comment. There's, funeral planning to financial planning to medical care planning. And even as they're aging, how do they want to support their care? Like I said, the time that we have today to talk about is just the, just the openings, just the beginning. And it's just in honor of National Healthcare Decision Day today to have all of you join us. And I just want to invite people to, put into the chat any, personal experiences they've had, challenges from just listening to the conversation. If they have any questions that they want to ask of our speakers for any kind of tips or advice, or just how to approach these conversations, please put that into the chat box now. We'll be opening up our Q&A soon. I do want to say, I think I forgot to mention that Annie, I believe, needs to be leaving momentarily about a few minutes. And if there's any particular questions that you would like to address to Annie, to please put that in. We'll kind of prioritize those first. And maybe Dara, can we check in with Holly? I haven't seen her dumplings recently.
Oh, I'm here. Dumplings are being cooked right now. So.
And Holly, I'm going to have you kind of maybe take over any Q&A that we have.
Yeah, so we're in a unique position where we have all these experts here at the table. So I know everyone's got to have some kind of burning question. Probably and remember, there's no stupid questions because this is a very complicated subject, but it's inevitably a subject that we're all going to have to discuss with our loved ones or even with each other. So if anyone has any questions, oh, Olga, go ahead. I see your hand raised.
I just wanted to mention a couple things. First of all, great conversation. I'm very sorry because I forgot to thank you and Elizabeth and Dara and fellow speakers when I was introduced, and I felt horrible about that. So thank you, ladies, so much for all the hard work and hosting this. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things for what Michelle said. So many wonderful points. The funeral home should be there to help you with that stuff when you were saying how you're getting like anxiety about certain things. So not all funeral homes know about all customs. So you do want to, research. And luckily in San Francisco, I mean, I know at least for our funeral home and the others I know, we know that stuff. So sometimes people come to us and they've already had discussions amongst the family and other people that are maybe giving input on what they want to do. So they tell us, and that's great. Other people don't know, and they need us to guide them. So either way, we're there to help for that. And then you guys are talking about the designated power of attorney. So that also, most of the time, has language that transfers over into funeral arrangements. So it's good for planning when someone maybe isn't able to make their own decisions anymore, healthcare wise. And then it also can continue on. So you're still the point person even after someone's passed. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Olga. I was just going to say, Dara did put into the chat that next week, Friday, we usually follow up these table talks with a tea chat, which is really much more of even more casual situation for an event where the audience, because mostly this event is just the people at the table having a conversation, but because there's been so much discussed that we want to allow the audience to rejoin us next week to further process anything that's come up, questions, and even just given what Michelle brought up and what Olga brought up, it would even be possible for us to even talk about the funeral traditions and, just to learn in that capacity from each other. So I'm just putting it out there that because, we create as we go. And I think next, you just gave us an idea that next tea chat, we can maybe focus on some of the, the actual specifics around funeral. And maybe we would love to have you back, Olga, to help us understand and learn those from the different various Asian cultures. Thank you.
I'd love to.
Does anyone have any questions for Annie, Emily, Olga, or Michelle, or even Liz?
I actually wanted to thank Olga for representing, the funeral home, because like I had said before, I literally had like a couple of hours to plan a funeral, which I never did before. And they provided, it was a different, of course, this was in Sacramento, but they provided so much support and so much information. I mean, I didn't know, you got to pick up a stone or, and then there's another stone inside the casket and all this stuff, and every little detail to tailor it to, and my mom was with us because we were picking my father's stuff. And so she even said, I don't want that plot. The tree stump's going to grow into me, So, it's good to have their input if they're finally open to it. And I really appreciate the funeral planners for that. And you guys deal with a lot. There's that acute stress and anxiety that we're going over and the grief. And my brother had some regrets. And we even started arguing in front of the funeral planner about things. So, it's good. Again, for my father, there was little opportunity because it was a fast, unexpected death, and there was so much dementia. I appreciate Emily too, because with the financial advice, the long-term care, having him not have planned anything, literally, we were probating his death and we were probating his parents' death, and I had to track those death certificates because he never did it. So, it's so important. It'll make life a lot easier if you can have these conversations and just be prepared on all angles. If you can't, it's still possible because you have, people available to assist you and everything, but it makes life easier to kind of know ahead of time.
Thank you, Michelle. Annie, did you want to say something before you had to go?
Okay, sorry that sorry everyone, I have this 2 o'clock meeting that I must get to. I appreciate the chance of connecting and talking to all of you. So just I'll continue to come to these tea talks or table talks and maybe share some of Holly's delicious dumplings in the future. But thank you, Dara and Elizabeth, and also Holly. So if you have
Thank you
questions,
so much, Annie.
email me, okay? Bye, everyone.
And we'll be sharing Annie and others' contact information in the follow-up email, so that if you do have questions for Annie or some others that we don't get to, or you don't really want to ask right now, or you need a mull on, then you can go ahead and contact them directly.
Okay.
So Aiden did have a question. Aiden, are you comfortable just asking your question to the group, or do you want me to read from the Q&A?
Oh, I don't mind asking the group.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a question about long-term care, or like possible, like having to put my parents in a nursing home. And I'm the youngest in my family, and my mom expects me to drop everything that I've built of my life and to move back home and care for her. And my older brother still lives with her, but she still expects me to take on the primary caregiving activities for her. So I'm just wondering, how would you negotiate this conversation, or even, I guess, contemplate like this huge burden of guilt?
Well, the guilt is horrible. I live with it every day still, because my mom still asks, when am I going home? When am I going home? And I mean, she had fallen. She lived with my sister for a couple of years, and she had fallen and broken 2 hips. And I mean, we just can't care for her because she'll fall a lot. And the guilt it's there, but how I approached it with her, again, my father passed first, so I was able to say, Mom, there will be a day, you see Dad has dementia, he's can fall and he's falling on you and you can't pick him up and things like that. So I could use that as an example to say, there may be a day where we can't take care of you for your best, what is best for you, because we could hurt you more and everything, but we're doing it because we love you, and you might not understand it at that time, but just try to remember this is what we did for Dad, and this is why we're doing it for you, if you have that opportunity. But the guilt is there. I almost left Onlock about a year ago before COVID. Thank God I didn't, because I thought I could live in my mom's, bring her back to Sacramento and take care of her and do a full-time job. And, I thought that we could hire somebody. And thank goodness I didn't do that, because I realized it's not possible. She wouldn't get the care she needs. And she would know just that it's actually a burden. She's being a burden, and that would hurt her more. So I think it's important to know that you let them know it's not a burden, but if you keep falling, that becomes a burden. And worrying about you all the time, when she was living alone in Sacramento and falling, laying in the front yard for 2 hours, things like that, and grabbing plants to get up, you just say that's a burden. That hurts me more than anything, and you will be taken care of. You're always in my heart. And you try to be as close as possible location wise when you find a place to at least one of the siblings or something, because you really want to make those visits when you can too. But it depends on, of course, the situation and everything like that. But I don't feel guilty, as guilty, because I know she's in the right place. She's being well taken care of. Our clients at Onlock also have that guilt when they have to go to a skilled facility or a board and care, things like that. But social workers, everybody, the team is great and works well with you to help with that guilt too. So reach out to social workers or agencies, things like that, for advice. But you just live with the guilt. Our parents, Chinese parents or Asian parents, made us feel guilty. but that's how, because we care. And I think if you, I mean, as loving as they are, they raised us right. So they're starting to adapt. Like Annie had said earlier, with the time of COVID, it opened up this conversation, and I think that helps a lot too.
I just wanted to say also, I've had to deal with this guilt in the caregiving as well numerous times in my own family. And I think something to mention to people, so the people that we're speaking of that may need to transition to more serious care than we can give in the home, is that if something, forbid, were to happen at the home when we're the caregivers, the guilt that we would have would be more than likely pretty severe. And so then they would maybe think, okay, I don't want to put my child or whoever that relationship is in a position to have something happen. And then we feel like it's our fault, because we're not equipped. And maybe our home's not equipped. And so I just wanted to mention that too, to kind of get people, again, we're wanting people to understand and not have fear. So they really don't think about the fear, but kind of understand why we're having the talks and why this is so important to talk, especially prior to, an emergent situation.
And I just add to that, this has come up. My mom is thankfully still fairly independent, but every time I see her, I think she's just going to fall over, like she's just at that place where she's so fragile. And I've tried to bring it up. We have talked about, it's not that my sister and I don't want to take care of you. And again, what if your level of care requires more? And I'm bringing this up just because sometimes whatever our parents say will trigger us. Because even when I say that to my mom, I was like, when we get to that point, how would you, so trying to put the control and power back in her hands to tell us, like, how would you like us to manage this? Would you allow someone to come into your home? But I want to work in partnership with you. And what she responds with is, don't worry, when I get to that point, I'll take care of it. Again, doesn't elaborate. I'm left to think, like, what does that mean? And it's hurtful because sometimes I get the sense that she will take her own life because she doesn't want to be the burden. She's alluded to it several times. And I have actually even said to her, I said, Mom, I understand you don't want to suffer. However, if you were thinking that when you had there's a legal way of doing it, let's talk about that. So then we're bringing up like medical aid. But again, looking for every opportunity, because in the Asian community, a lot of times they might the suicide rate and depression is so high that they think they're doing us a service. And we don't often talk about our feelings. And so even in that moment, I could find myself being like upset. I'm like, I'll be so mad if you did that. Like, if you want to do that, like, let's just, then we don't get to say bye or, but I think sometimes we don't even allow ourselves the emotion. And so already knowing our parents are of the generation where it's stoic and you don't talk about it, that I think I found that if I allow myself to come from a vulnerable space and really just be, I love you, this is, it's in respecting you, I really want to hear. And because sometimes I think they come from just a lot of mistrust and distrust. So even in their own children, and I think I sometimes react to that too, but I just get that that's where they're coming from. And managing my own reactions. But I'm just saying these conversations are challenging. Sometimes we might be stopped based on our parents' reaction. And how do we also just kind of take pause to see where they're coming from at the same time. So it's just patience all around and still being persistent. So thank you.
Aiden, thank you for your question. And thank you to those of you who have been sharing your stories in the chat. Before, I see some people are having to go. So before people leave, we do have one more question from Imagine that they're going to put in the poll. And we might have time for one more question after that.
It's a few more than one question, but
okay, sorry.
Yeah, it helps us having this data also for getting more funding and things like that. So thank you for taking a minute to fill it out.
Also, the dumplings turned out great, just so you know.
I can't wait till we can actually all sit down and eat the dumplings.
Oh, Holly and I are very much looking forward when we can actually hold these events live, like I had mentioned.
I'll just mention a quick little funny story around the taboos with death. So my aunt's Chinese, and my uncle and my uncle, we're a family business. My uncle works, we all work together. And when they were first married, my uncle was a businessman, and he was a businessman for decades. Now they know, he's a funeral director, but it's just kind of funny because that's kind of how taboo it is. Just.
And as we're just wrapping up here, I just want to say again, thank you everyone for joining us and being in this conversation. And I know there's a lot of information to process. I didn't really see a lot of stuff happening in the chat, but again, we would love to see you back next Friday, just to again further unpack and talk about what came up for you. We love to hear from the audience, how, if any new pearls were available and how to have these conversations. And again, we know that an hour and a half is just not enough time.
So on the screen now, Dara is showing some upcoming Table Talk events. We do have another AAPI focused event on May 30th, and that's going to be focused on South Asian ancestral grief and reclaiming spirituality. And we have a plethora of other Table Talk events focused on the Black community as well as the LGBTQ community. So this Table Talk series, it's much larger than us, and it's going to continue for the next couple of months. So stay tuned through letsreimagine.org for getting updates on what we're doing and what Reimagine is doing together. Thank you everyone for coming today and for sharing this table with us.
And I just wanted to add to that, if you are interested in hosting or organizing an event that would relate to one of these communities, I am here to support you with that. And I will put my email in the chat. It's just dara@letsreimagine.org, because we do want to continue these events past kind of like the formal launch of the series. And I also just want to say a huge thank you to Elizabeth and Holly and Michelle and Olga and Annie and Emily for really just such a moving and important conversation. And I learned a lot today, and I'm sure other people did too. And I do think it made me think about a lot of the conversations I still personally haven't had. I just wanted to say that we thank you for joining us, and that there are many ways to stay involved. Attend and share table talks, host your own event or experience. You're also, of course, invited to donate. And if you're interested in talking to someone on our development team, Stephanie is available, or you can go to letsreimagine.org/support. But I think that's all I have. When I shared my screen, the little poll went away, so I don't know if that happened for everyone or not.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to the audience. I'll be sending you all a follow-up email if you registered, and that will contain, I don't know if it'll contain the recording. I don't know if the recording will be done by then, but it will contain some links and also the contact information of the speakers we have here today. Thank you so much.